For the Roman Empire, conquest was crucial. That's how we ended up with the Roman Empire, this vast, sprawling state that covered much of Europe, North Africa, and the Middle East. And so for a Roman politician or a Roman soldier, the highest achievement in your society was to conquer some foreign territory, to win a battle. Now, a victorious Roman general, if he had conquered some new territory, when he returned to Rome, a special celebration would be thrown in his honor, a celebration called the triumph. We get our word triumph from this Roman tradition. The triumph was essentially the high point of Roman life in Roman culture. It was a mix of a parade, a feast, a religious service, a sporting event, all rolled into one for multiple days. For a militarized society like Rome, conquest was the highest achievement, and so the triumph was the highest honor, the highest celebration in Roman life. And it was a time of intense celebration, as long as you were a Roman and not one of the captured prisoners from those who had been conquered. It was a day of joy and celebration for Rome, but the Romans had this one strange tradition on the day of the triumph, and throughout all the days of the triumph, however long it lasted, and as the years went by, they got longer and longer. There was one government official, often an enslaved person, but an enslaved person who actually worked for the government as a government official, whose job it was to follow the victorious general around wherever he went. Wherever he walked, walk beside him. Wherever he rode in a chariot, ride beside him. And every so often, this government official would lean in and whisper to the general, Memento Mori. Remember that you are mortal. Remember that you must die. What a strange tradition. Why say this morbid, dark thing on the day of such celebration for Rome? What a letdown, what a party pooper, what a wet blanket. And this is the original act of almost literally raining on someone's parade. Because here's the thing about us humans. We love to be successful, and we love to associate ourselves with those who are successful. And so whether in the Roman Empire or in 21st century America, we learn and we earn and we hustle and we struggle and we work so that we can be wealthy, powerful, prestigious, so that we can reach the top of our field, so that we can be successful, and so that we can be recognized by our society as successful. Just like those Roman generals, we want to reach that peak, that zenith of life. We want to be able to say, we made it. For people obsessed with success, whether Roman or American, this ancient Roman tradition of whispering Memento Mori, remember that you are mortal, is something worth considering. Because no matter how smart we are, no matter how hardworking we are, no matter how tough we are all mortal. We will all face death, and not only our own deaths, but unfortunately often the deaths of our loved ones. Many of you know that from your own firsthand experience. And in this sense, if we're trying to be successful, there's one task that we will ultimately fail at. We won't live forever. In the struggle against death, we all lose 100% of the time. And so, Memento Mori. Now tonight, just a few moments ago, we remembered and we rehearsed the death of one particular man, this Jesus of Nazareth. And as you heard, Jesus angered those in power, both the religious authorities as well as the political authorities. They were angered by Jesus, they were suspicious of Jesus, they were worried about Jesus' growing popularity, and so they decided he needed to be gotten rid of. Not the first or last time that a powerful government decided to kill someone who was an inconvenience. Despite Jesus' great teaching, despite all the hungry people he had fed, despite all the sick people he had healed, despite the fact that his community was growing. In other words, despite the fact that Jesus looked really successful, Jesus was arrested and killed summarily without any resistance. One day he was preaching and teaching and sharing a meal with his students, and within 36 hours he was dead on the cross. For plenty of people, including many of his students, many of his followers, Jesus' death on the cross meant unequivocally that he had failed, right? And it's not hard to understand why they felt that way. It's hard to be successful in life if you're not alive. Lots of these students left. They left Jerusalem. They abandoned Jesus and the movement. They went into hiding. They did not want to share in Jesus' fate. But if we've been listening and paying attention these last few weeks, as we've been listening to primarily the Gospel of John, the last few weeks of Lent, you may have noticed something, right? That Jesus' criteria for success and failure seems to be very different than the criteria of success and failure that most societies have, whether Roman or American, right? Jesus doesn't seem interested in conquering anyone or making a lot of money or having a lot of power or having a lot of prestige. Jesus doesn't seem interested in reaching the top of his field. Whatever success means for Jesus, it's not that. It's not what it means, let's be honest, for most of us throughout history. Jesus' goal here is different. We could have already noticed that as he predicted his death, as he walked into Jerusalem knowing what was waiting for him. In other words, strangely, Jesus dies on Good Friday, but he also seems to have succeeded. And that shouldn't be the case. How is that possible? This is where Good Friday can begin to teach us some of the hard lessons of our faith. Christianity does not promise that we can avoid death. Instead, Christianity promises that although we must face death, our own and those of our loved ones, that death won't be the last word in our story, but it will be a word, maybe a few sentences, maybe even a whole chapter of our story. We don't get to avoid death. It's just that we believe that there are chapters to follow that one. In other words, though, this means for us as Christians that death then isn't necessarily a failure. Likewise, surviving and doing whatever we have to do to survive, saying whatever we have to say just to hold on a little bit longer, that's not necessarily success either. Jesus is offering us a different path, a different model, a different criteria for success and failure in life. Again, though, it's worth stressing. Good Friday is a good day to stress this. We still have to face death. Death is often scary. Death is often painful. Death is often full of despair for the one who's dying and for their friends and family as well. And we have to face that fear, that pain, that despair. And so, Memento Mori. If we instead try to ignore death or forget about it or pretend like it's not true, then when death comes for us, and we know that it will, it easily overwhelms us. It knocks us down because we've had our head buried in the sand and we're not ready at all to face that fear, that suffering, that despair. Of course, I don't mean to suggest that there's really any way to prepare for death. Ultimately, there isn't a way to be fully ready. But I think part of what Jesus shows us in the Passion narrative is that if we can admit the reality of death and reflect on it and really know it and face it, we can actually take some of death's power away from it. Some of the power that death lords over us, we can actually undermine by simply facing it. And by facing the reality of death, there we can build a faith that can sustain a true and genuine hope, not a false or saccharine or superficial hope, a hope grounded in reality, including the reality of death. In the Passion, Jesus teaches us not to try to run away from death. Jesus doesn't run from the cross, he walks right to it. He's teaching us then to face death with honesty and integrity. And so, Memento Mori. And I think it's this fact that Jesus sees clearly, that he has admitted and reflected on the reality of death, that allows him in his final weeks and his final days to not be overcome by sadness or fear or anger. I want to be clear here. Jesus, I am sure, felt sadness, fear, and anger. We don't get this part of the story in John, but in Luke and Matthew, we are told just how afraid Jesus was as he prays in the Garden of Gethsemane. He's praying so hard that he sweats profusely. Luke has this powerful language that he's sweating so hard it's as if he's bleeding. Jesus is afraid to go to the cross. Of course he is. He's a human being, and he's no fool. He feels fear, he feels sadness, he feels anger, but those emotions don't overcome him. They don't control him. He's not dominated by them. Knowing what he's facing, he's able to face it with integrity. And that means he's able to continue to speak and act according to his values. He continues to speak and act in accordance with his mission, rather than allowing those negative emotions to control him, rather than allowing his executioners to control him. Jesus remains who he is up until the moment of his death. And this is the beginning, just the beginning, but it's the beginning of Jesus' success, even in death. Paul, I think, puts it really succinctly in Romans chapter 6, verse 9. We'll be hearing more about Romans chapter 6 tomorrow at the vigil. I hope that you'll join us. But for now, I'll just give you this teaser. In speaking about Jesus on the cross, Paul says this, quote, "Death no longer has dominion over him." Death no longer has dominion over him. It's not that he doesn't die. It's not that he doesn't suffer. It's not that he isn't really dead. He is. But that death no longer has dominion. The way that Jesus has faced death, and by the grace of God, Jesus dies, and yet death doesn't control him. The full truth of just how little control death has over him isn't revealed on Friday. We'll get there. But death, nevertheless, even on Friday, no longer has dominion over him. And then this is the lesson that Good Friday can teach us. If we are following Jesus, if we are his disciples, if we are trying to walk in the way of the cross, let us follow Jesus in his attitude towards death as well. Not an easy path, but I think a valuable and worthwhile one. Jesus neither denies death, he doesn't ignore death, but nor does Jesus allow death to rob him of hope. Easter is coming soon. Easter's a lot more fun than Good Friday, right? We'll have more fun on Easter. And in Easter, we celebrate the fullness of just how not controlled by death Jesus is. We will celebrate the hope that our faith gives us. But even now on Good Friday, we begin to glimpse what Jesus has done here, what Jesus is teaching us here about death. That death will indeed win many battles. Death will win a bunch of battles against each one of us. And yet, death seems destined to lose the war. That we must go through death, but it does not have to be the final word in our story. That through and with Christ we can succeed even though we know we must die. The hope is already beginning to reveal itself if we pay attention to the way Jesus acts, even in the Passion. But let's ensure we don't skip past the reality of Good Friday. Let's not miss a chance to honestly reflect on death. I know it's not comfortable, but I think we're hearing tonight that it is necessary. And so, my friends, Memento Mori. Because it's in this honest reflection that we can begin to really follow Jesus, to really walk this path with Jesus, and learn how to accept and know and trust that though indeed death will win its one battle with each one of us, it is destined to lose the war with the God of life. Amen.